Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for dialing into our webinar this morning. I know that most of you are probably adapting to the current situation with remote working, so your attendance is really appreciated. I'm Misha. I'm the Business Development Manager here at Paycheck. I wanted to start by just briefly explaining to you our contingency plan with what's going on in terms of coronavirus. So we at Paycheck actually trialled our contingency plan in the last week of February and the first week in March. We then executed our remote worker plan on Monday the 16th of March, so making sure that all of our operational and communication structure were in place and working well. So I know that most of you are already our existing clients and will have received some communication in regards to that, but I just wanted to reiterate that we were well prepared for this to happen, and everything is currently working well. On this morning's webinar, I'm joined by Sarah. Sarah is one of our partners here at Paycheck. She's just going to give you a brief overview and an introduction as to who she is and our partnership with her. Sarah?
Hello there. Hi. Hello there, everyone. My name's Sarah Lawrence Williams. I deal with employment tax, working with employers on employer issues, so PAYE, national insurance contributions. I've been working with Paycheck for a number of years. Basically, I'm looking at what payments don't go through the payroll. Have many years' experience in personal tax issues and employment tax, gained in the Big Four accountancy practices. For the past nearly 11 years now, I've run my own consultancy, providing employment tax advice to all businesses, both large and small organisations. One consistent area of employment tax is with employment status. This would be providing advice where the individual is operating as a sole trader, for instance, reviewing their employment status to ensure they may be paid by the end client gross of tax and NIC, but also assisting the end client, the engager, when they become involved with status challenges by HM Revenue and Customs. With regard to IR35, I've been dealing with the intermediaries legislation since introduction, and latterly have been involved in advising in the off-payroll rules, both in the public sector and now preparing for the rules to be introduced into the private sector. So this is very current and something that I am heavily involved in.
Perfect, thank you. So if I start by going through our agenda for today's session, the webinar will last around 60 minutes, give or take. There may be, depending on how many questions there are that come through. So the plan for today is that we'll go through the recent budget announcements. Sarah is then going to run you through what is IR35, how are the changes going to affect your business, what is it that you need to do to prepare, how can you support your contractors, and then there will be time for a question and answer session at the end. On your screen on the right hand side, there should be an option for questions. So anything that you have throughout the session today, feel free to pop them on there. We'll do our best to answer as many, if not all, of the questions that come through. Anything that we are unable to answer today, we can come back to you. We have all your contact details from where you've registered, so we'll be more than happy to follow up on anything that we feel we're unable to answer live if it's more personal. We just want to make sure that we're protecting you guys. So if we start by going through the recent 2020-21 budget announcements. So as already confirmed, from the 6th of April 2020, the new national living wage will increase to £8.72 from £8.21. An increase to the national insurance primary threshold and lower profits limit to 9,500, which was originally 8,632, and that again is from the 6th of April 2020. So that will save your typical employee around £104 a year. And the income tax personal allowance still remains at 12,500. The increase in the annual limit for the junior ISA subscription, so I don't know from a personal level if this will affect any of you. This is now 9,000 and that was originally 4,368 and that's for the up and coming tax year. For investors, the increase in the annual capital gains tax exemption is now 12,300 for the next tax year, and the tax-free dividend allowance remains at £2,000. We had confirmation that the previously announced reduction in the corporation tax to 17% would not be going ahead, and that will remain at 19%. The tapered annual allowance for pensions increased the threshold and adjusted the income levels by £90,000. And that means that anyone with an income under 200,000 will now be subject to the taper and will have a £40,000 annual allowance. And lastly, the employment allowance for employer national insurance contributions is increasing from £3,000 to £4,000. Now, I've just done a summary of what the announcements were. Obviously, there's a lot more that were covered, but I thought that these might be the most relevant, just to remind you of what was announced a couple of weeks ago. So moving on then, Sarah's going to run you through understanding the IR35, what it is, and how it will affect you.
Thank you, Misha. So what is IR35? Well, I'm sure we're all aware now with so much publicity, but IR35 was first introduced on the 9th of March 1999 via a press release from HMRC called IR35. The legislation then became effective from 6th of April 2000. Up until then, no pay-as-you-earn could be as no pay-as-you-earn could be applied to payments to limited companies. The purpose was to stop independent contractors, call them workers, who were operating through an intermediary, such as a personal service company, we call it a PSC, and who would, without the limited company, be deemed to be an employee. So it was seen that the worker was gaining unfair tax and national insurance contributions advantages, and the purpose of IR35 was to ensure that workers would pay broadly the same tax and NIC as employees. The IR35 legislation does also apply to workers working as an office holder or undertaking office holder duties for the client. So under IR35, the worker was responsible to determine whether the engagement was inside or outside of IR35. They needed to give due consideration to the rules, and if deemed inside IR35, the PSC would have to account for liabilities due on the income from that specific engagement. Of course, workers may have many engagements, so it's necessary to assess each one independently. I think it's apparent that over the years, many have determined that many workers determined that IR35 did not apply, that they were outside IR35, although HMRC would not necessarily agree. This is a very complex area. It needs much consideration as to the underlying relationship, the nature of the working relationship, over how services are provided. There are a series of tests to be applied. No precise legal test determines whether inside or outside. It's just that many facts need due consideration. I think the complexity of the IR35 rules can be demonstrated in fairly recent cases, one in particular involving 3 BBC presenters. This dispute with HMRC ran for some 8 years. The case follows other recent high-profile cases involving, again, TV presenters, Lorraine Kelly, who won, and Eamon Holmes, who lost. So it kind of demonstrates the difficulties in looking at what is correct and how to get it right if experienced tax advisors and HMRC are up against one another. You have to ask, what chance does a worker have to get it right? It's true to say that historically HMRC have simply lacked resources to tackle non-compliance in this area to any effect. So the off-payroll working rules, in the public sector were introduced in April 2017. From that date, all public sector bodies were then responsible for determining if any of their workers were inside or outside IR35. Although the rules are called off-payroll, whilst the reforms essentially change who is responsible for determining IR35 status, the underlying legislation has not changed. At the time of introduction, it was denied that the public sector bodies were making blanket decisions in respect to determinations, but I think that's clear. Also, that the public sector bodies would simply not engage with contractors, and the result being that workers moved away from the public sector. It's considered that many lessons should have been learned, but seemingly they've not been recognised by the government, and such problems and issues have been raised and publicised, not least at the recent House of Lords Finance Bill Subcommittee. So despite this, the government decided to extend the off-payroll working rules into the private sector. Since this decision, there's been much industry backlash. There are very strong concerns that continue to be raised, including about organisations, again, making blanket judgments over IR35, and there's been much publicity about this. There have been strong calls for abolition of this, with much lobbying of MPs. As recently as February, there was a review, although this was disappointing and offered little in new announcements, really. It simply reaffirmed the government's intention that it would go ahead to be effective at that time from the 6th of April 2020. However, as we'll all be aware, only a few days ago it was announced that the introduction would now be delayed for 1 year due to the current circumstances with coronavirus. So this legislation is now due to be introduced with effect from 6th of April 2021. I think it's important to stress that this is just a deferral. It's not a cancellation of the rules. At this stage, there's no hint of the government scrapping the IR35 reform altogether, and it seems to remain committed to this policy going forward. So who is affected? Well, all public sector bodies continue to be, and now those in the private sector that are medium or large organisations that engage workers through intermediaries, typically such as a PSC. Now, small organisations are exempt. The definition of small is in line with the Companies Act, whereby if two or more of certain conditions are met, they are small. And those conditions are the annual turnover not more than 10.2 million, the balance sheet total not more than 5.1 million, and there are no more than 50 employees. So this includes connected and associated companies. Groups of companies are combined for the test. An unincorporated organisation is considered small where the turnover does not exceed 10.2 million. And so where the organisation, the end client, is small, they are exempt from applying the new rules, and the existing rules surrounding IR35 apply, in that the PSC has to continue to make the IR35 determination. There could be a possible lack of clarity here if they are a small organisation and they are exempt from the new rules, with responsibility for determining if IR35 applies remaining with the worker. This could cause confusion or lead to misunderstandings. It is true to say that a worker can request from the client the size of the organisation for these purposes, so they should then be aware that the responsibility remains with them. So this should assist. So with the shift in responsibility moving to the medium-large organisations, they are required now to determine the status of these workers and if the engagement is inside or outside. So to do this, they will need to use the same principles as IR35. Now, the new rules will apply to payments that are made on or after 6th of April 2021 for services that have been provided after the 6th of April 2021. This change was announced in February. Previously, it was to apply for payments made on or after April, regardless of when the services were provided. So once determined who they have to assess, they're then required, the organisation is then required to advise the worker and any others in the supply chain. If IR35 does apply, the entity paying the worker's intermediary, the fee payer, which will usually be the organisation paying the worker's PSC, the client or the agency, has to make deductions for income tax and employee national insurance and to pay employers' national insurance. Over to you, Misha.
Perfect, thank you. So I just wanted to do a poll with everyone who's dialed in. So I'm just going to activate it now. Okay, so it should be coming up on your screen now. You should be given the option. So I wanted to find out whether you were considering cutting the use of contractors completely with the changes that are coming into effect. So if you could just vote yes or no for me, it will give you the option, it should do. Okay, we've got them coming through now. Okay, so the reason for this poll is because we did some research on a survey, and Harvey Nash recruitment agency, they did a survey, IR35 survey in 2019. So most of you, 64% of you, oh no, it's changing again now. Okay, we just leave it there. So 63% of you have said no, and 37% of you have said yes. So what the survey showed that 1 in 5 businesses are actually considering cutting the use of contractors completely. So that's quite a high number, 1 in 5. That was based on a mixture of 1,100 businesses and contractors as well. So most of you have said no, but yeah, I just wanted to see what your thoughts were. So if we go back to Sarah, it should now take you back. There we go. Over to you.
Okay. So now looking at, with the responsibility shift to the business to determine status, we are, of course, looking at a contract for services and not a contract of employment. And it's necessary to look at the overall appearance of the engagement, in that we need to look at a number of factors to include things like personal service. You might see the contract naming the worker individually. Supervision, direction and control, who decides basically what, when, where and how. Is there a mutuality of obligation, which means, basically an expectation to be offered and an expectation to accept work? Can the worker provide a substitute? If so, who pays the substitute? Is there any financial risk? Is there an opportunity for the worker to profit or a potential to make a loss? Part and parcel of the organisation, are they an integral part of the business? Can they be seen to be, one of the cogs in the wheel? Who provides any equipment for the worker to provide their services? Sometimes this might be irrelevant, but there may be equipment that's needed. What is the length of the engagement? Are any benefits provided, such as holiday pay or sick pay? Is there a notice period on termination of the contract? And the intention of the parties, what was the intention at the outset? This would normally be documented in a contract for services, that they would always be an independent contractor and not an employee. There are some other areas, I haven't sort of put them in any order, but there are certain weighting, but other areas are expenses paid to the worker on top of the fee. If so, what is the process? Are they reimbursed in line with an expenses policy, which is quite common to see? Restrictions in working in the worker providing their services to any other clients. Obviously, they're running their own business, so it would be feasible for them to have a number of clients. Who are the payments made to? Obviously, they should be made to the PSC. Training costs, who are they borne by? Typically, if you're running your own business, you would be training yourself and bearing those costs. And things like responsibility for PAYE national insurance liabilities, they should rest with the PSC, obviously. No one of the above criteria will determine status, as you need a considered opinion in the overall appearance, but there are some areas that are weighted more heavily, with the personal service, the supervision, direction and control, substitution. This is a very major issue, although in a fairly recent case, again, a TV presenter won the case and substitution was not the major point. Financial loss, risk in an employment scenario, an employee might mess up a job, but they continue to be paid their salary whilst they put it right. So if a worker, if there's defective work, you would expect the worker to be rectifying this in their own time at their own costs, which equals financial risk. Again, the mutuality of obligation, or MU as we call it, in employment situations, MU elements are present and key. As you appreciate, this puts a lot of responsibility on the end client. They are required to take reasonable care when making a status determination, and failure to take care can result in the workers' tax and NIC becoming their responsibility. So, looking at the facts of the engagement, how do you arrive at the status? Well, we've all heard about the check employment status for tax, the CESS tool, which is provided for support. Basically, HMRC introduced the CESS tool, which assists organisations to assess the status and assists HMRC to consider engagements to fall inside and outside of IR35. The original tool that was introduced was actually seen as flawed. A further update was made to the tool in November last year, and HMRC continues to state it stands by the CESS results. So obviously many organisations will rely on this to make a determination. However, in my opinion, and many opinions, it's still considered that the CESS tool is flawed. The process of the tool, or more particularly the outcome of the tool, is confusing, and also it doesn't consider the fundamental test of MU. If anyone's ever experienced or ever run tests, in my opinion, it's difficult to determine the true status with yes or no answers. You need further investigation and to understand completely how the engagement works by drilling down into the facts. It's not just always straightforward yes or no.
I agree with that, Sarah.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of publicity about that. You know, answers by one party based on pure fact can differ by another, and you get a completely different determination, as I'm sure everyone will be aware that's used that tool. So once the determination has been made, the organisation then needs to provide the worker with a status determination statement, an SDS. The SDS outlines the decision reached by the organisation As to the worker's status, so it must say whether they consider they are inside or outside of IR35, and they must also provide the reasons for the decision. I've been approached by a number of organisations who've asked if there is any kind of format or template for an SDS. Obviously, they wish to demonstrate that they've taken the required reasonable care and are concerned to get it right. They don't want to be non-compliant. There is actually nothing official, and I think it would benefit if there were some format to use as a guide. The SDS must also be passed on to any other party in the chain, so any agency or anyone else that's in that chain and the worker contracts with. If any party in the labour supply chain fails to pass the SDS to the next relevant party, that entity becomes the fee payer. So again, there are concerns that this must be correctly processed in order to avoid any liabilities landing with somebody that's incorrect. So if the worker or deemed employer disagrees with an SDS, there is a client-led appeal process. So end clients, the organisation, will have 45 days to respond to a worker or deemed employer where they have challenged the status determination. The end client can either inform that the initial determination has been reviewed and is deemed correct, or they would have to issue a new SDS if for any reason there were changes to be made. So the SDS is in place, and if determined inside IR35, the fee payer is then responsible for calculating the deemed payment, accounting for employment tax and NIC, withholding tax and employee NIC from the payments to the PSC. They must pay employer NIC, and the reports to HMRC go through RTI, real-time information. So the RTI requirements are the usual procedures as for employees. So adding the workers to the payroll, a flag will show them to be an off-payroll worker. A starter checklist to be prepared. Normally, the box C on the checklist will be ticked that you have another job, as the primary employment will be with the worker's PSC, obviously. By ticking this box, this puts the worker on code BR. A further code will be issued by HMRC if appropriate. If benefits should be paid, these should be treated in the same way as for employees with the usual P11D process. When the contract has finished, so the worker is leaving, a P45 will be issued in order to remove them from the payroll. And at the end of each tax year, obviously one wouldn't expect it to roll into many tax years, but at the end of the tax year, a P60 should be provided. So a very similar process for employees on payroll. So just moving on to how to prepare. Well, in light of the delay to the introduction, the next 12 months do offer valuable time for end clients and agencies to prepare for the reforms. I think it's still important organisations do prepare for these changes, and the sooner the better. Time will come around all too soon, really. Appreciate at this time there's difficulties with everything else going on, but really it is a time to prepare and to communicate. Communication is really key with any workers. So some ways to start preparing to determine if the small company exemption applies for the coming tax year, to identify which engagements are in scope of the new rules, to organise some assistance with IR35 and how the rules operate, i.e. get some training from professionals, agree how to undertake the assessments and to complete the determinations, whether you're going to use the CESS tool or some other method, such as seeking professional advice. The requirement to send the SDS to all workers, but also to determine whether there might be any others in the contractual chain that will also need to be notified. To formulate a policy and process for appeals and disputes against SDS determinations, establish how it be resourced. With a 45-day to respond to an appeal, it's essential that this process doesn't break down. So make sure you keep records. It's important to demonstrate care has been taken, reasonable care has been taken, and you will need to demonstrate this should there be any dispute. Organisations can update their IT infrastructure to accommodate the payments being made to contractors deemed within the scope of IR35. Each contract renewal needs a new status assessment, so how to monitor the workforce and ensure that the working practices continue to reflect the written agreements. Organisations to determine if they are to perhaps continue to use PSCs. Obviously the poll there was quite interesting, Misha. Or maybe move to other models, and so helping to prepare for these alternative arrangements, whether it be putting the individuals as a PAYE employee or maybe engaging through an agency or an umbrella company. So when looking at the engagement, some suggestions where we can look at how this can be improved to the best possible. So it should always be the case that the worker is offering their services. To offer an acceptance of services is absolute paramount. To clearly define with the client that there's no master-servant relationship existing, and ensure the worker is in control. They should not be told what, when, where and how. To avoid replacing an employee with a worker carrying out the exact same work. To agree that a substitute can be used. That's a subjective issue, but it's something that should be considered. Agree for a specific project period and for fees to be based on the project. To avoid timesheets where possible. The worker obviously would be working not just should not be required to work from the end client's offices, but they should be working from their own offices and premises. They should take out their own professional indemnity insurance. Investing in their own professional development, so training to ensure that they keep up to speed with requirements, rather than relying on the end client. Where possible, to have a few contracts at the same time. Invest in their own equipment. To be responsible for making good any work performed in an unsatisfactory manner in their own time at their own expense. And to avoid being seen as a fixture of the organisation, so they're not part and parcel of this. All of the above factors may seem obvious, but it's helpful to consider these areas and to prepare as much as possible in advance, so that you can be clear that the status determination is true and correct. So over to you now, Misha.
Thank you. So just going back to you guys then, with the question box that's on the right hand side, I was hoping that you guys might be able to answer this question. So what percentage of contractors do you think plan on raising their rates to cover the tax burden with the changes that are going to be coming into force? So if you can pop in the question box whether you think it's A, B or C, I'll just give you a couple of minutes to do that. We'll get a collective of what people think. So just A, B or C, 29%, B 17% or C 63%. Just get some answers coming through now. A couple of A's, a few B's, no C's yet. Okay. Okay. So the answer is B, 17%. And that again was based on the Harvey Nash IR35 survey in 2019. So 17% of contractors plan on raising their rates to cover the burden. So that's not as high as I thought it would be, but it is, the contractors are considering increasing that rate so that their take home is high, because they are going to be losing money should their assignment change from being outside to inside. So I just wanted to summarize what Sarah has spoken about throughout this session, because the most important part from you guys as end clients is supporting those contractors, because there are two sides to this, in that the contractors don't want to risk perhaps their take home being reduced, and you guys as end clients don't want to lose your good contractors and your good workers. So with supporting your contractors, as Sarah said, I want to reiterate that communication is key. Although a lot of the contractors will be fully aware of what is going on, and will now also be aware that it's been delayed, it's important that between the two, you're both singing from the same hymn sheet, and you're both in agreement as to what's going on, how you're going to work together moving forward, what it's going to look like for them. You're transparent with them, so what your position is, they're fully aware of that. You agree a plan to move forward if you are going to be affected and if they are going to be affected, so you actually sit down and work. I mean, if most of your workforce are permanent and you only have a small handful of contractors, then this shouldn't take too much time, but it's important that you are all in agreement as to what's going to happen, and be understanding of their situation. If somebody has been contracting perhaps incorrectly for a period of time, this could be a huge adjustment to their life. So it's being understanding of that, but also they need to understand your position in this as well. And contractors to seek professional advice. So perhaps if you have any contacts, then pointing them in the right direction and giving them the right contact, I guess, to help them understand what it is that they need to be doing and where they stand in all of this. So I just wanted to reiterate what Sarah had said, really. I have asked for Katie, who is our head of business development and marketing, to just join in quickly on the back of a meeting that she had a couple of days ago. So Katie, are you available now to just run through what it is that we were going to talk about?
Hiya, yes, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you, perfect, thank you.
Great. So I was just going to talk through just a little bit about what's happening across the payroll industry. We were part of a payroll industry leaders meeting on Monday that included people from big business, some of the big accountancy firms like Deloitte, and just payroll operators across all different types of companies, to discuss all the different changes that have been coming out as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. Some of the things that we talked about included SSP. We talked about furloughing of employees, and we talked a bit about the grants and how it might be that our clients can apply for these sorts of things. I mean, the short answer is that for a lot of these things, HMRC has not yet explained how you can reclaim SSP for employees that have been affected by the coronavirus, and B, they have not explained how you'll be able to reclaim money for furloughed employees, or exactly how you can obtain or get hold of some of these grants. But we can go through a little bit more detail just to explain how you can operate in the meantime. So for your employees that are maybe on sick pay or have had to self-isolate, there is advice on what to do in the meantime whilst you don't know how you're going to get that reclaim. So for anyone who's actually sick or self-isolating, the best advice is to go to the HMR, well, the government website, where it talks about what are the rules really. So the refund will cover up to 2 weeks of SSP per eligible employee who's been off work because of COVID-19. Employers with fewer than 250 employees will be eligible, and the size of the employer will be determined by a snapshot as of the 28th of February 2020. Employers will be able to reclaim the SSP for up to 2 weeks, and they should maintain records of those staff absences. So whilst the employees obviously are told they should not go to a GP or go anywhere to get a fit note, what they can do is go online and they can get a self-isolation note or a note saying that they basically go through a kind of checklist on the NHS website, and it tells them that they seem to have symptoms and should stay home. So you should be asking your employees to give you those, because at some point we believe that when you are able to get your reclaim, HMRC will ask you to prove which sicknesses are related to COVID-19, because obviously you might have some other sicknesses that are not related to it. Do we have any questions on that just before we carry on?
Yeah, if you do have any questions about anything, please put them in that question box on the right hand side that I mentioned. That's what we're all here for in the session today, to answer anything that you weren't sure about on both sides of the presentation.
Okay, great. I think we'll just carry on then. If you do have any questions by the end of the session, we can always go back. The other kind of hot word is furloughing employees. Because of the coronavirus job retention scheme that the government announced last Friday, UK employers will be able to access support to continue paying part of their employees' salary for those employees that would otherwise have had to be laid off during this crisis. All UK businesses are eligible for this, but there are certain criteria that will apply. The first thing to note is that you can only furlough an employee if you make a contractual agreement with them to do so. So you do need to think about whether you need some employment law advice or an HR advisor who can maybe do some one-off work with you and make sure that you have got all of those right contractual documentation in place with your employees before you furlough them. Once your employee is furloughed, they are no longer allowed to be working. So you could have some employees working and some employees not. It doesn't mean that your entire business has to be closed down, but you do need to make sure that the individuals that you are claiming are furloughed are no longer working for you. Or doing, not no longer working for you, but no longer doing any work at that time. HMRC will then reimburse 80% of furloughed workers' wage costs up to a cap of £2,500 per month. Now, we haven't really been given the detail about whether that is the total cost of the employee or whether that's the actual amount that would be paid to the employee. So I would be very careful about how you plan this, and consider that if it is the cost, then you need to include your employer's and national insurance or your employer's pension into your calculation. HMRC are working to set up a system for this reimbursement. At the moment, a lot of the discussion in the meeting we talked about we talked about how it would probably be easier to go through as part of our FPS submission, but it seems that won't be the case. HMRC will open up part of the government gateway where you'll be able to indicate which employees in your business have been furloughed, and then we still don't know how that reimbursement will, what that process will look like. So as a reminder, to access the scheme, you need to make sure that your employees have been designated as furloughed. So your employees need to be notified of that change and they need to agree to that. And then you need to make sure that you've got adequate information on those employees to then submit it to HMRC if or when that becomes available. And then the final point, do we have any questions on furloughing?
Someone's asked, when will HMRC's staff retention portal be live? It's at the end of April.
Oh, we don't actually know that. HMRC haven't confirmed that at all. I mean, they just say that they're working on it. So we imagine it will be in the next few weeks, but we haven't got anything. We do know that there was a bill submitted to Parliament for a similar scheme for self-employed workers as well. So I do wonder whether they're waiting for that to pass, which they expect to happen in the next week to 10 days, and then they'll be developing it as a whole, rather than do one piece of work and then have to do another. Again, that is just speculation. We haven't been told at all when that will be happening. Do we have another question there?
Yeah, how do you mark an employee as on furlough?
So we believe it will be an online portal on the gateway, but what we don't know is whether HMRC will have a list of your employees on there, or whether you will need to submit. I imagine you'll need to submit the same information you have for the payroll, so their NI number and their full name, maybe their date of birth. But again, we don't know. Just make sure that you have really good records. Any of our clients, we do always ask people to submit all of the personal details required. So just make sure that you're keeping all of your records. Obviously, at the end of this tax year, we do send you back a year-to-date report, which details all of the personal details for all of your employees. So you will have all of that information within the next couple of weeks anyway, just to bring up as soon as you need it. But the main thing will be making sure that you have actually got those contractual bits of documentation in place. Whilst Paycheck isn't in a place where we can advise you on employment law changes to contracts, we definitely have lots of kind of partners who can do that. If you need any help with that, just let us know. Send us a message after this, and we can make some introductions for you.
Perfect. Someone's asked if we are handling all of this for them, if we're running their payroll already.
So if we're running your payroll, obviously we're putting through the SSP parts of it, and anything that HMRC gives us access to do, we can do. So for example, where if they explain that the reclaims can happen through maybe part of the EPS submission, part of your RTI submission to HMRC, then of course we can do all of that. If it becomes a point of logging in as a personal employer to furlough employees, then we wouldn't be able to do that. We only have an agent login for you, because because it's a change in contract between you and the employee. I would imagine they will ask employers to do that. But you know, as soon as we know more information, we'll definitely be giving more advice and helping with any way that we can.
Perfect. Then it's someone else has asked, does the employee claim the 80% salary, not the employer?
No, so you would pay the employee as normal or at a reduced rate if you wish to, and the employer would be the one that claims that money back then.
Okay. Is there a final date to submit furloughed employees? Will it always be backdated to the 1st of March?
We haven't been given a final deadline. What we have been told is that it will be open for up to 3 months. HMRC again haven't said whether that means 3 months from the first point of furloughing someone. So for example, if you don't need to furlough someone from March, but maybe you do in April or May, whether you get 3 months for that individual employee from that point. They haven't said that. It could be it goes March, April, May, or it could be from when you furlough an employee. We're still waiting on that information.
Perfect. Would the monies for furloughed employees be paid to the employer or the employee? I'm not sure if you've answered that one already.
Yeah, so from everything we've seen, it would be paid to the employer. We haven't been told how that would be done or when. It was kind of theorised in our meeting on Monday that potentially it could be through rebates off your PAYE and NIC payments, or off various tax payments that you might have, but that's just a theory. We haven't been told anything yet.
Perfect. And last one I think that's come through at the moment is, are employers likely to be reimbursed payroll via PAYE payments?
Well, that's one theory. We think that possibly it will be reimbursed in that way, but again, we haven't got that information yet. But whilst we are on the topic of PAYE and NIC payments, just to go over a few final bits of advice or news that has come out in the past week to 10 days. Time to pay is an initiative that allows businesses to delay their PAYE, NIC and VAT payments. The VAT payments have actually just been completely delayed anyway, but with time to pay, if you call up HMRC, you can get a delay on paying your PAYE and NIC to help your cash flow. When you call up, they will ask you to explain how your business has been interrupted, and you'll be expected to commit to a new deadline. It won't just be an indefinite delay. So I would advise, if you are having cash flow problems, that would be a really good option to start with. For those specifically in hospitality, retail and leisure, you should receive an automatic discount on your business rates. This will come directly from your local authority on your council tax bill. So obviously that only means if you're using a premise that has a business rate. If you have had your council tax bill already, you should check with your local authority and ask them to reissue it. And the discount should be done automatically. You won't have to ask them you won't have to kind of fight for that if you have the correct business rates already registered with them. And finally, there are sort of a long list of business loans, grants and rebates that companies can take advantage of. Obviously, if you take a business loan, those things do have to be paid back. The grants, you need to be able to submit kind of financial statements to prove the reasons that you need the grants. So I think the main thing, whilst there is little known about some of the ways of obtaining these things, is to speak to your business advisors. So speak to your accountants, bookkeepers, anyone that deals with your kind of business management, and make sure that you have all of your financial statements in order and ready.
Perfect. Thank you, Katie. That's all of the questions. If there's anything that we haven't been able to answer with what Katie has gone through this morning, or if you think of anything at the end of the session, my contact details are at the bottom of the screen. So you're more than welcome to filter any questions through to me, and I can come back to you with the answers and any support that you need in relation to that. The session is being recorded as well, so if there's anything that you want to revisit, or you want to listen to any answers to Katie's questions, or anything in terms of the IR35 that we've covered this morning, you will all get a copy or a link to the recording, so you can revisit that at any point as well. Katie, was there anything else that you wanted to cover? I'm just conscious that there was a couple of IR35 questions that were asked as well. Just wanted to...
No, that's it for me. The only thing I would also just remind our clients to do is to keep checking back on our website. If you go to our website, at the top under resources, there is a link called helpful information for our clients to do with COVID-19 and business continuity. We are updating it every other day with as much information as we find. At the moment, we've actually got so much information there, we're about to just reformat the whole thing so it's a bit easier for you to find what you need. But do bookmark the page and keep coming back to it. And also just follow our LinkedIn page and our Facebook pages for regular updates as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Misha.
Thank you. Okay, so just before you all go, because I'm conscious of the time, we did just have one IR35 question, which I think will be relevant for all of you. So Sarah, if you could answer for me, could you just confirm that IR35 workers are eligible for holiday and statutory payments if they move to PAYE?
Okay, so the worker has no claim from the end client in respect of statutory payments such as statutory maternity pay, statutory sick pay, statutory paternity pay, etc., and no holiday pay either. So all of those rights will be given through the personal service company, as that is the primary employer.
Perfect.
So
Thank you.
there's no obligation on the end client.
Amazing. Thank you. Okay, so in terms of questions, I'm conscious of the time, and you guys have all been dialed in for almost an hour now. So I just wanted to say thank you so much. I know that there's a lot going on at the moment. I'm sure you're all extremely busy just making sure that your business is able to function as well as possible in the current situation. So really appreciate your time in dialing in. As I mentioned previously, any other questions, please feel free to send them through to myself. My email address is at the bottom of the screen. If there's anything for Sarah, then again, please send it through to me. I can liaise and we can come back to you, or I can. But I wish you all the luck in the world with what's going on at the moment. I hope you're all staying healthy and safe during this really strange time. And yeah, anything that you need, please feel free to give us a call. And thanks so much, Sarah, for all of your support in the session today as well.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye bye now.
All right.